Okay. Happy Thursday, everybody. Hey, Bullcatcher. Hey, Gashrin. I want to do as many of these as I can get a hold of, um, which is to say, this comes from fellow member of the community, Christer Enfors sent this to me. Sent this to me today, but reached out to me, I guess, yesterday saying, hey, they're working on this thing they want to put out for 5th edition, and it's in alpha, beta, gamma, epsilon mode. And specifically asked for pull it out on stream and have everybody take a look at it and maybe help workshop it a bit and just check it out. And I please feel free if other folks have stuff they're working on. And obviously the one caveat is we're gonna do it on stream. You have to be able to share it. But um, I really appreciate him thinking of us in terms of as as somebody who they'd want to share their stuff with. And of course, it's right up our alley. It's a Hexcrawl system for 5th edition. I'm guessing since it's called D12 that it's based on some kind of 12-sided die mechanic. As usual with all these things, I have not read it. I have not pre-looked at it. Keep in mind that this is just one person's project. This is not final layout. I have no idea where in terms of development it is, other than that they have some at least fairly complete draft that they sent over. Perkins needs food. Perkins is about to die. Well, hopefully not. Perkins, get you some food. I know it's depending on where you are. I know it's a 2 o'clock start time. I wanted to go for 1 o'clock. I wanted to start this an hour ago, especially since I know Christer is somewhere overseas. I guess Sweden, right? Christer, you're in Sweden. But I got pulled into like an 11:30 to 1 o'clock meeting, and the last thing I wanted to do was be late, and so I shoved off till 2. But we'll see. Christer says there are no illustrations and layout sucks, so be prepared. Yeah, I'm not going to worry about. So a couple things for this. I'm not going to be pointing out typos. I'm not going to be concerned about that, and obviously we're not going to care about illustrations or particular layout things. This is really going to be about, at least my thought is, we're going to look at concepts and that sort of thing. The big stuff. 8 p.m. in Sweden. All right, cool. So this is prime. We're in prime time streaming over in Sweden and I guess northern Europe. So good to know. Okay, so here we have this so far. It's I guess about 20 pages. Oh, look at that. Thanks for the shout out there, Christer. So I was a little note in the resources section. A little flattery will get you everywhere. So in the table of contents, and I like that I guess this is probably automatic. I know this is I remember as soon as I saw this, I was like, oh, this is definitely running through some kind of latex layout engine. There's nothing wrong with latex, by the way. And Christer, depending on what you're using, I know you told me something that then kind of goes into latex further down the line. There are some resources. I don't know them offhand. There are some resources for creating game books with latex. So if you're looking for something more kind of game layout, there are some tools. You might need to do some searching around, digging up to find them. I know I looked at them. I've looked at them off and on because I do like a lot about latex in terms of laying out. I like the idea of just working. It basically, if you're not familiar with latex, essentially it's a language for laying out documents. It's used a lot for academic documents, and it's not quite markdown, but essentially the document itself is basically all plain text using different sort of, I guess it is like markdown in the sense that it's using language within the text to do stuff. So instead of, if you're familiar with something like InDesign, there are a couple ways to do tables. One, I think the more modern approach now is to actually use a table element, and you could put your rows, your columns, your rows, you set it up like you were using it in Word almost. You could plug a table in. Now, the very, very old school ways to do things with tabs. If I've done layout in the past. I'm not calling myself a layout expert, but I used to do Quark Express way back in the day, and that one they didn't have a table element, so you basically had to use tabs to tab delineate everything over. But you were doing all these things to kind of spatially put it out. And something like latex is there is some kind of spatial putting it, but it's also amount of using different commands in line to do it. But basically, when you're looking at the document, your kind of work document, it's basically a plain text document with all this markup mixed in with the actual content, as opposed to something like InDesign, which is what you see, what you get, WYSIWYG sort of thing. Hey, Red Caps. Oh, nice. Off the Red Cap said they just did an interview with Justin Alexander. I'll have to check them out. Check that out, rather. Okay, so let's get into it. First up is the overview. The first rule of running a hex crawl is don't tell your players you're running a hex crawl. I would probably agree with that. This system can be run without the players knowing that they're in a hex crawl. To them, they're just playing whatever game you're already playing. Probably some variant of Dungeons and Dragons or similar. You can run the hex crawl rules behind the scenes to provide interesting travel and exploration mechanics, other players knowing how it works. There's no need to show them the map you're using. They can make their own map, or you can have a player version of the map that they can see if you so choose. These rules are intended for running hex crawls in D&D 5th edition plus. Got to have that plus in there because 1 D&D is coming, but can easily be adapted for most other systems. Yep, I think that's all. Great. Hey, Blaine Crichton, welcome. Redcap says that latex gives them a headache, though the workflow of Emacs to latex to PDF is solid. Yeah, they prefer Affinity Publisher. Yeah, I've dabbled with Affinity. Affinity, again, if you're not familiar, I don't want to go too many rabbit holes, but Affinity is essentially a competitor to Adobe. If you're wondering what the difference is between them, Adobe is at this point all subscription based. You pay a monthly fee and you get access to various parts of Adobe's suite, and you can sign in for the full Monty or different pieces, however you want. Whereas Affinity, you're still they are back on the, I feel like at this point almost endangered pricing model of you just buy the software. So there's Affinity Publishing, and then there's an Affinity photo program, and there might be a drawing one too. I can't remember. I don't remember the drawing one's part of the photo. There might be 3. So there's 2 or 3 apps they have. And so if you want to buy one and just say, hey, you know what? I just want to buy it. I don't want to be on the hook to Adobe or any other company for some kind of monthly subscription for this piece. The Affinity route is a good one. I haven't messed around with publishers so much, and I tend to use other Adobe tools. So it's easy. Right now, it's easy for me to justify in my mind anyway, paying for the suite since I'll use a bunch of their different things. But Affinity Publisher, I've heard a lot of good things about in terms of being an option if you want to get into doing more complex whatever layouts, but not wanting to have Adobe get their hooks into you. Perkins says the format looks good. Yeah, I don't see a big problem. You could add if you want to, Christer. You could look online with latex. There's all sorts of plugins basically, or I forget what they call them, libraries. Maybe they call them packages. So if you want to do something like have automated every other line gray, you can do that stuff. Oh, Redcaps is for as far as Affinity, it's designer, photo, and publisher. Okay, that's what I thought. I knew there was something there. And they do have iPad apps too. I don't know if designer has one, but there are iPad apps for the other Affinity ones that are quite good. I actually have more experience with those than I do with the desktop products. Okay, hex terrain types. This system uses 10-kilometer, aka 6-mile hexes. Using horses halves the times, but they can't be used in dense forests or mountains. If horses can be used in your mountains, then your mountains count as a hill. Christer says the problem is that latex is generated, so they don't write it. They don't know how much control they have over it. Ah, I see. So yeah, you're using some kind of middleman tool. Yeah, Christer, I can shoot you a couple of applications. I mean, if you like the application you're using, obviously don't change it on my account. But there are some apps that kind of help if you want to deal with latex directly, which may or may not be, or at least more directly, which may or may not be helpful. The thing is, there are tons of packages to allow latex to do a ton of different things, and if your application doesn't have either their own version of doing it or doesn't have allows you to hook into those directly, then it might be worth looking at just getting into latex without it. But stuff for another time. Okay, so we've got our road, grasslands, deserts, light forest, dense forest, swamp, hill, heavy rain / let's see. So hill adds 1, heavy rain or slow adds 1, snow on the ground adds 2, and mountains add 3. These are all good. I like these. And this is something I've been dabbling with myself, but I like just personally when you start going down these rabbit holes about looking at biomes and things like that, the thing that you realize is that hill, I think I've talked about this before, hill and mountain even aren't really biomes. They affect biomes in terms of different biomes based on altitude, which then affects potentially the temperature, and then also things like water. So you'll have these different kind of zones, and to talk about different things, but that like a hill isn't really its own. Like that's the only thing that it's just unfortunately back in the day they weren't thinking along these lines. I kind of wish they did, so that we could be more in line of easily or not even having to do these kind of conversions. But if you look at hex, the kind of the the very basic sort of standard hex types, they don't map all that well, or they only map somewhat well to biomes. If you start looking at biomes, because yeah, you can share steppes and plains and things. Okay, those are grasslands, but then you're like, well, what is hills? And it's like hills aren't anything. I mean, you can have, as we know, you could have hills that are grassy, you can have hills that are forested, you could have hills that are rocky. Like a hill itself, you're not going to find a biome like here's the hills biome. It doesn't exist. Only in terms of how that altitude, if you're on top of a hill, affects the other elements. It's usually humidity, basically amount of moisture, kind of water and temperature are the things that really are going to affect kind of your biomes. And so, in terms of how they affect your biomes, yes, a hill is going to affect potentially the humidity up there, depending on the height of the hill, and then will affect the temperature again, depending on the height of the hill, and certainly depending on the height of the mountain as well. But there's not like here is a mountain biome. So here, having them as modifiers, I kind of like because it starts getting you in that thinking of okay, you could have a mountain that other than the top, which might be just rocky, whatever, can be in, a forest, let's say, at least up until a certain point, or can be in a desert, right, up until a certain point, that kind of thing. Punk Soup says terrain is more apt description. Yeah. Well, that's what he's got there. Hex terrain. Punk Soup also says they use Markdown. Markdown's great. Markdown just I guess you have to use all kinds of other tools or things to get latex. I think is a step up on Markdown in terms of its flexibility, but it also adds a bunch of layers of complexity on there as well. Morgan says a biome can be very granular, taiga versus simple forest. Yeah, though I mean, yes, and there's a certain point which is going to be entirely up to you individually as to where you get to the point where it's difference making or not. I don't tend to find those things very I don't tend to find there's a lot of use for that in terms of like I know if I'm in sort of a subarctic plane and I have a forest hex, then it's I would call it okay, that's taiga. I think taiga is for forest, or maybe it's for grasslands up there. I can't even remember if that's. But either way, I don't need to have like a bunch of them, but it's nice. I think the big things for me are those elevation changes because that's really the thing that's going to set it off. Like it's there's not like a hill so that you go looking for, oh, what is this hill like? And that's why what I find a lot of hex maps is it can be difficult when you see big swaths of the map that have hill terrain on them, but that doesn't really tell you anything because most times hills, unless you're in the Badlands or something else, aren't just bare rock hills. They're kind of a part of whatever the biome is around them. But if you see on a map and it's like just hills, like well, that doesn't it just there's a certain point where the hills as a and I think less so with mountains because I just imagine all rocky crags and things, but for hills in particular, like what is it? And that's why I almost prefer the mixed where you see like hills, forest and hills, or grasslands and hills. Something that tells me, okay, what is other than the fact that you're going up and down elevation and in hills, what is it? What's on those hills? Brian Smith says, "Wait, what's on this page?" Well, we're looking at terrain types. We're getting sidetracked. We're looking at terrain types, and I like what Christer has here in terms of breaking it down. Though I like to look. The only thing I would say I do differently, Christer, and this is no way means that you have to do it this way. Is I like roads as a modifier of the terrain as opposed to its own terrain type. But that, of course, is totally up to you. I thought that just gives you a little bit more flexibility. So what I would do is if you have these or adding pluses, I would have roads and add a minus. That way you can have like, oh, I'm in the swamp, but there's a road, and you can use the modifier. But that's a very personal feel. Redcap says that they feel that most people in Fantasyland treat hills as grassland, aka the Shire. Yeah, and that's probably true. I think for me, I actually tend to I probably veer in the direction of forested hills because that's a lot of where I live here in it's like New York City. If you get outside of New York State in this area of the state, it's a lot of forested hills, the Hudson Valley, the Berkshires, the Sharon Valley. There's a lot of stuff here that's all kind of forested hills. So that actually is my mental, probably default hill as opposed to the Shire. Krista says their thoughts is that a road in the plains or roads in dense forest is basically the same. I can see that. That works. Note that the lines in the above table with travel times in the format of plus X are not their own terrain types, rather they are modifiers. Yep, I got that. All right. For each hour past 8 hours, the party is using the travel action, and we'll see that below, In a day, each member has to make a Constitution saving throw with a DC of the number of hours they've been active that day. If the save fails, and the party member takes 1 level of exhaustion. This means if you travel for 10 hours in one day, you must make 2 saving throws. After the 9th hour of travel, make a DC 9 Constitution saving throw. After the 10th hour of travel, make a DC 10 Constitution saving throw. For each Constitution saving throw which you fail, you take 1 level of exhaustion. Ooh, so that exhaustion can pile on quickly. Ryan Smith says that their hills are all forested dunes. That's so it's so wait, so are the dunes so it's forested dunes, so they're sand, but they've got all kinds of trees coming out the top. I got you. Oh, Western Michigan. Well, then, okay. So I thought you were making a joke, but I'll have to look up Western Michigan hills because it sounds because dunes. I think of sand, like at the beach. So it's hard for me to think of than forests popping out the top. But maybe the ground is just sandy, rocky. You've given me some inspiration, Brian Smith, to check out what Western Michigan looks like. Moving fast or slowly. The party can choose to move at double speed. If they do, each hour of activity counts as 3 hours for the sake of calculating exhaustion. So while you may explore the hex in 2 hours instead of 4, counts as having been active for 6 hours that day, increasing your risk of becoming exhausted. Additionally, while moving at double speed, the party has to do all rolls with disadvantage. If the party moves at half speed, they can make rolls with advantage. Okay, so I get these things. The only thing I might think, Christer, is just in terms of layout, I'd rather, instead of, I think I would move these. I'd rather learn about the rolls before then learning about this part. That way, when I get to rolls, I've already read the rolls. And same thing, instead of having like see below for the travel action, just put these, I would just kind of move these so that we can cover rolls and the travel action first and then cover these. But in terms of mechanically, it seems fine. The only thing is that remember that since time and distance are abstracted in travel, you might be having essentially, if nothing's going on, an hour of wilderness travel in terms of real time at the table might be like a second. Because like for me, I'm covering 3 or 4 hours at a stop. If nothing's happening, I'm covering 3 or 4 hours at a time. So I would just have them rolling like once after another, like roll for 9th hour, roll for 10th hour. I just could have them do it back to back. So what I might do to make things a little bit simpler is just say, I'll give you whatever this train you want to walk 14 hours that day. I'll give it to you. And at the end of that 14 hours, you can call it whatever you want. And then we'll make that roll. And then you can have maybe multiple. You could even have like Howard, depending on how much you fail that roll by, you get multiple levels of exhaustion at the end of it all. Instead of having multiple rolls, because when you're running wilderness travel, you're compressing time so much that I might as well just tell somebody, we'll just make, if you plan to travel for 12 hours, you're just gonna have to make four rolls. Just might as well make them back to back to back to back, which might feel a little bit weird in the flow of play. So that might be the one thing I would do if you and then just calculate it all at the end. But what you could say is maybe have a note that if you're in that, say you're traveling for 12 hours and you get interrupted with a wandering monster encounter in the 11th hour, then you might say roll at that point so that, if you have exhaustion going into combat or going into some kind of skill exchange, you want to have that exhaustion piles up. But as long as you're just moving, then just push it to the end and then all that can come in basically afterwards. So maybe I would say as long as you're doing the travel action, you can keep moving. Whenever you have to switch from the travel action to something else, whether it's resting, whether it's an encounter, whether it's something else, then you have to roll for the see of what exhaustion is piled up on you. Hey, Squirrel Hermit, thanks for joining. Now we get into our rolls. Characters can take one of several different rolls during a hex crawl. Each roll has to make rolls, and they might want to find a different rule for rolls because thesaurus and like Merriam-Webster or whatever your dictionary website of choice that's got a good thesaurus section can come in handy for something. I'm not sure if we want to use, because just rolls, it's probably not the best. I know you've got it in quotes and look, reading comprehension, we can tell what you mean, but it might be good to come up with a different word for roll here. Job, I'm not sure. I'd have to think about it, but Plug Soup says the hills in their city are extinct volcanoes. Well, that's pretty cool. Are they really extinct or are they, just dormant? Okay, so in terms of what we can do, so you can be a lookout, stay alert for enemies. When there is a random encounter, characters who have this role will make a perception check to see if they spot the other party. Makes sense. Um, so the other thing with lookouts, and this is again totally up to you, Krister. Do you want to give them a chance to avoid a random encounter, um, or maybe you want to get into what that perception check does? In other words, someone who does excellent looking out. What are the effects of if you're doing that? I mean, you may cover this later, but uh, maybe we'll check. But like, what does making that perception check do for you? And one of the things you can use that encounter distance. If you have the better someone's looking out, then the further away that they're going to spot enemies before they spot and maybe have a chance to then evade or avoid an encounter if they don't want it. Navigator is the one who tries to prevent the party from getting lost. At certain times, there will be a risk of getting lost. Then the navigator will be asked to make a survival roll to prevent that. Foragers try to find fruits, mushrooms, and other edible objects in the environment the party passes through. When rolling on an action table, you might get the result find resource. Characters who have this role will then be asked to make a survival roll to see if they spot the berries or not. Okay, so we'll have to take a look at that later on. And okay, Krister is confirming it is covered later. Okay, and Perkins says that Mount St. Helens is considered active. Well, yeah, I mean, I'm old enough to remember when that thing erupted back in the 80s. So I didn't think it was extinct, but I guess it's hasn't done anything since then, right? It's that big. That's it, right? That blew up in the 80s and then it's been quiet since. Redcap says assignment selection roll. That's interesting. Or task rolls. Yeah, either of those will work. Yeah, you just probably want to avoid roll rolls, right? Choose rolls wisely. This becomes a tactical choice. Should you have two lookouts who both can make checks for random encounters, or should one of them instead take the foraging roll? Should we move at double speed to catch up? Yep, these are all good things. Yeah, you want to be. I like this. I like the idea that you can double up on some of these to help you out. You can also use Krister if it makes it easier or not, or you can leave it up to GMs. Remember, there's that help action. So instead of having it, do you want to have someone? You want to have them roll perception twice, or do you want to have them roll whoever has the higher perception roll, and then the second person can add that help action? I'm not sure which ends up giving you better odds of success. So maybe leave it a choice, but something to think about it. Perkins says that Mount St. Helens is mostly quiet, but there's still stuff happening. Does anyone remember that movie where they did after Mount St. Helens and it had I forget who his name was. Was it? It wasn't. Who was it? I forget. It was playing that old man that refused to leave the mountain, got swallowed up in the ash and stuff. Sad stories. People that just wouldn't leave. I never quite understood that. I get that that's your home, but I mean, it's a volcano erupting. It's not like something where you think, okay, I'm fighting people or something where I can stay by my homestead and maybe the troops or the gangs or whatever will pass me by, or I'm gonna sit on my stoop with my shotgun and my stick and I can wave it up. It's a volcano, man. It doesn't care. It's just gonna wash right over you. I just I was like, it's just suicide by volcano, I guess. Redcap says that Yosemite is the bigger worry. It says extinction level event. Well, let's hope then that Yosemite stays nice and quiet for a few more millennia. All right, what do you do when you have no certain role? This I think is good because that is certainly something that could come up. Each party member can have one role at a time. If the rules call for a role from someone with a particular role, and no one in the party currently has that role, then any other party member, but only one, can make the roll instead, but with disadvantage. If you're already rolling with disadvantage because you're moving at double speed, then roll with triple disadvantage. That is, roll 3 times and take the worst result. Would we call that triple disadvantage or double disadvantage? Either way. All right. So I think that makes sense. I like the fact that you're giving the option for somebody to, but only if no one's in the role. You might wonder though, why would the party just leave roles blank and not put somebody? It just seems like in these kinds of systems, it's worth putting someone doing it, just anybody, even if whatever job it is doesn't really suit your skills or attributes. You might as well put someone in it because it's better than just having nobody do it. But it's a good idea that you can have somebody fill in. Perkins says they were sent home from high school when Mount St. Helens erupted. For Portland, they had to look straight up to see the ash cloud. Whoa. Oh, and Christer says this would come into play if one person's traveling alone. Oh, yeah, makes sense. You might want to put a note in here also, Krister, if it's in a game with retainers, hirelings, henchmen, whatever what do they call the fifth edition equivalent of? There was a name for them. I can't remember. But anyway, if they have some NPCs along for the ride, can NPCs do these things? Is it the same roles for NPCs? You might want to put that in there. Uh, but let's see. So Christopher, I guess maybe it wasn't super clear to me, though I can see here. So someone in this instance, you're saying someone who has the role of lookout could make a foraging roll, but at disadvantage if there's no forager. So just want to make sure I'm getting that correctly. Hireling, yeah, both. Yeah, I thought there was a different name for it. The ones in fifth edition, they had some rules that came out in beta, and I think it's in like Dragons of Ice Spire Peak. I think they came out with these official rules. I thought they called them something else, but they didn't call them retainers or hirelings. But I could just be misremembering the word. They had some special rules. I don't know. I keep wanting to say like assistants, but I know that's not at all correct. Okay. So basically you can, if I see, so if you took if you had three party members, you took on 3 roles, but then there's a 4th role that comes up, they can do that. Gotcha. Okay. Sidekicks. Thank you, Blaine. That's what I don't know why I was thinking assistants. Yep. Thanks, Red Caps. Yep, I was thinking of sidekicks. Hexcrawl actions. As the players move around your world, they are implicitly using hexcrawl actions: explore, forage, hunt, rest, travel, and visit. Players don't have to know about these actions. Instead, use the GM to translate whatever they say they want to do into an appropriate hexcrawl action. Here's a brief overview of what you can translate, how you can translate what your players say into the most appropriate hexcrawl action. Okay, so now I like this. We have another little table here or I guess examples. The players say, "Hey, we travel north." That's travel action. Players say we make camp for the night. That's resting. Players say we head back to the camp. That's visit. The players say we look around in this area to see what we can find. In this case, ask them if they're looking for anything in particular and choose an action depending on their answer. No, we just want to look around. That's explore. We're looking for interesting sites. That's also explore. We're looking for food. That's foraging. We want to hunt for food is hunting, or we are looking for monsters/enemies. That's also hunting. Cool. I like that. Because I think a lot of GMs, that's where you can get stuck, is trying to do that translation of my players are saying this, like, what does it actually mean? Let's see. Punk Soup or Perkins says, replying to Punk Soup, that they have active volcanoes in their D&D games, and they use a hex flower to simulate random activity when it mattered. I don't have any active volcanoes in my games, but I did really appreciate, what was it? Was it Contest of the Warlords? I think it is, which is that big Hexcrawl. I did do a read through of it a while back. You look it up, where I think they had somewhere a volcano, and I think it was also there's something that was like the Ring of Fire, and it was like multiple volcanoes. That was also a portal to the plane of fire, elemental plane of fire, and I really dig the heck out of that. I think that wild or some kind of like naturally occurring planar portals, especially to elemental planes, I'm in love with them, and I think they're underutilized. Basically, it works like this. Travel is the most general one. It moves the party from one hex to another. Visit is used to move to a known location, one you know the way to, in the current hex. Explore has a high chance of finding locations in the current hex. Hunting in the current hex has a high chance of triggering random encounters. Foraging in the current hex has a high chance of finding food. And resting has a low chance of anything happening, which is just what you want when you're making camp. Totally makes sense. In the following sections, you will find event tables, one for each hexcrawl action. Each result in those tables corresponds to secondary tables you will find. All right, I'm going to kind of skip over the setup stuff. I'm sure it'll be understandable. I'm curious how the hunt one goes. I'm always torn with hunt mechanics. Like, because here I like, so we have 2 types of hunting, right? We have hunting for food, we have hunting looking for a monster or enemies. I'll be curious how they handle it, because I think one thing that comes up is I really like the idea on the one hand of saying, okay, if you're hunting, yeah, that is a way of basically triggering to see if a random encounter or wandering monster check comes up. And that works for the monsters more. But then if you're looking for food, I presume you're not just trying to hunt any tracks. Like if you're hunting for food and you see, I don't know, tracks of a band of orcs coming through, you're not going to follow them, or you're not going to try to engage with orcs. That's not what you're doing. You're trying to find, food, not enemies. And I haven't figured out a good way, I think, to balance that, where it's like, great, you can roll on this table, but maybe rolling with some kind of modifier to skew it towards like your kind of mundane animals and not so much your supernatural creatures, but maybe having still some chance of it because your hunting doesn't, you might run into something you don't expect to run into, kind of thing. We'll see how Christer got it. Ah, so Christer, okay, there's no difference here. Yep. One day I'll figure out how I want to do it. Maybe it might be like rolling multiple dice. You're rolling 2 dice if you're hunting for food, and then say 4 dice if you're hunting for creatures, and that way it kind of skews the results somewhat. Wizard says, but if you do it at half speed, i.e., you take your time hunting, you have the greater chance of spotting enemies first, so you can choose to skip the orcs if you're looking for deer. That makes sense. All right, so exploring. Purpose: to find locations while attempting to stay clear of encounters. Time used is the travel time for that terrain, and we roll a d12, and then depending on what we get, we either get a random encounter, an obstacle, find a location, we might find a resource or something special. Foraging is trying to find resources. Time used is the same as in the terrain. Let's see, same table. The vault. Let's see, the table is the same here. Which is, are the numbers the same? Oh, okay, the numbers change. So on the exploration table, you had a 1 to 3 out of 12 chance of a random encounter, whereas it's only a 1 to 2 chance when you're foraging. And then you have almost a 50% chance of finding resources, which you want because you're foraging versus something else. Okay, cool. So basically, it's the same. Looks like we're given the same outcomes in the table, but we're playing around with the probabilities. Perkins says that for them, having a nearby volcano that is smoking or showing glowing light against the clouds can foreshadow the eruption that matters in game terms. I mean, I should certainly hope if your volcano is erupting, that, well, I guess it doesn't always have to show things, right? Because I think what Mauna Loa just went off, and people weren't particularly prepared for it. They kind of knew something was coming, but had no idea when. And that's using scientific instrumentation, looking in the caldera, all that jazz. Whereas in olden times, when you would just be not even having a chance to look down inside the volcano, but you're just looking at it from a distance, you would have had no idea that the thing was about to blow up. Oh, Jaden Lewis has a question. All right, Jaden Lewis, throw your question in the chat. I'm here for you. Yeah, Perkins says that the Hex Flower took the activity away from them as the GM, and they just simply get to state what happens. Yeah, I think that's true of all these. A lot of the these mechanics is that you don't have to think of them yourself. You don't have to be responsible for them, and you can craft the kind of mechanics you use to give you the sorts of outcomes or progressions or anything else that you want, and then you get to be free of having to you don't have to feel like you're doing it. I'm not doing this to you. The dice are doing it. Jaden has wants to look at a character. Jaden, probably not at this time, but if you want to post it, say in the community tab, if you can go to the community tab on the channel. Where are you? You're on YouTube. Go to the community tab of the channel and post it in there. Maybe we can take a look at it at another time. Though I am not an expert on D&D characters, especially if you're talking D&D 5th edition character sheets. I'm not going to be of the best help to you on that. Perkins says the Hex Flower had random eruption without warning. Yeah, this should probably be an option. And things like ash clouds and I don't know, mumblings, all kinds of stuff. Okay, so we have foraging, hunting, rest. Oh, rest. It makes sense that you're not going to find resources or locations in a during your rest encounter. Travel. Let's see, we get yeah. I think I like this kind of setup where it makes the tables easy to read, and then I just have to worry about what I'm rolling. Sometimes find people will change the orders up, but I like this just as well. Visiting. We move between. Oh, this is only half. Nice. Random encounter. Okay, here. What do the numbers besides these events mean in the visit table, Jaden? Or I mean, Christer. Jaden, I do Dungeon Master, and I also make stuff. D&D Beyond is good. Jaden, like I said, you could throw it in the community tab, but I'm not going to have a chance to look at it here on the stream. But maybe if you throw it over there, maybe me or somebody else. There's probably folks here in the chat in community that can probably help you out better with like 5th edition than I can. If you're looking for somebody who's going to be like the optimization king or tell you where you've gone wrong or that you picked the right subclass or wrong subclass, I'm not going to be of particular help. If you go to my channel, click on it somewhere, it'll probably take you off the stream. Or you can right click another tab. You should see, if you go to my channel, the page, there should be like a tab that says community. And then there's a spot where you can drop stuff, and you should be able to drop links in there. If you can't, you can find me on Twitter somewhere at HexPressman. You can tweet me, something like that. But if you go to the channel homepage and then find the community tab and go there, you should be able to drop it in. Punk Soup says Tolkien might have been the first to use a volcano as a plot device in fantasy. I wonder about that. I mean, at least in terms of being epic, I think, yeah, I would say that at least if you're running a game and you've got some volcano in the distance that's glowing red and spewing out fumes and ash, I think people are going to leap to, you know, Sauron and that, which is, it's definitely the most well known. Whether there's some earlier sword and sorcery, Lord Dunsany, some other kind of story that has a volcano figure in, like, I wouldn't doubt it. But yeah, in terms of what is kind of set, I suppose the most common symbology of that kind of thing, yeah, it's definitely be Tolkien. Okay, so these are all. I'm not going to go through all these because I think we went through them, and I like that we have time, you know, time used, we have the purpose, we got kind of things that happen. I think the only thing, okay, the numbers are just the probabilities. I got you. All right, so then we have secondary tables, random encounters. When there's a random encounter, everybody with the lookout roll on either side makes a perception check to see if the opposing party is spotted. If all lookouts on both sides fail, then the encounter is canceled because no one spotted the other. I might not use canceled. Maybe you would say that not just neither party senses the other one, because maybe as a GM you want to use that. Canceled make it seems like it just wiped off the face of the earth and just never existed. Whereas I think maybe what we want is that neither side spotted the other, because maybe depending on future context, you might want to bring those creatures back in. Maybe you want to have the party later on comes back through this area and you want to have that as something they discover, that they find traces of the orc warband that came through. So I wouldn't use canceled. I would just say maybe they don't see each other. They pass like 2 ships in the night kind of thing. Okay, so we got, and the other thing that I think that's interesting, you might want to look somewhere, is that are we assuming, what's the assumption with other creatures? And does it matter if they're, and maybe you could give them, so what I would say is that, so you have lookouts at both sides, which I think, ooh, that's interesting. So that means that if I have my orc warband, then they've got people on these different roles or whatever we're going to call them also. Well, that's really interesting. But then I'm also thinking, but what if it's just a pack of wolves? Is there a wolf lookout? Like, what is that? You know, what does that mean? Kind of thing. So you might want to give like, hey, if it's animals, you know, versus basically your intelligent animal, then maybe unintelligent. If it's a giant congregation of slimes, they probably don't have a lookout, right? Or what you could do is just say, if it's unintelligent, then their perception or whatever their lookout, they're using like +2 or 5. I don't know, whatever number makes sense. If they're animal, then they'll have plus whatever perception for the lookout. And if they're intelligent, you can have them plus something else, or it could be by, it's just some way to help people when they're dealing with potentially creatures that, like, you don't want creatures who, in my mind, you're going to say, well, pack of owlbears isn't going to have a lookout. But maybe you'd say, oh, they do. Have you ever watched wolves? They definitely have lookouts. Oh, fair enough. But you know what I'm saying there. And you could say like, oh, if they're animals, they're lookouts. So we're just going to assume that it's like this. And if it's for intelligent, then we can assume it's like that. Christer says, with low intelligence, they don't have rolls. They just roll with disadvantage. Yeah, I would probably just write that in there. If you're dealing with unintelligent creatures, they just roll with this modifier with disadvantage. And that way it's just easy for someone to come in and just drop and say, okay, great, I can just do that. Perkins says, if both parties do not notice each other, might roll distance again just to see how close they pass each other, then make a call on perception. And Christer said they invented that just now. Hey, well, this is what we're here for, Christer. So, you know, that's great. All right, I'm not going to go through the size points and stuff. You might want to, the only thing is, so these, you're adding up. So each party of 5 medium-sized creature have the party size of 1 times 5, which is 5. This is basically I would, the one thing on the maths, it's fine, but my spidey sense says I might want to. Is there a way I can make this a bit like is this that granularity that we think we'll actually need, or can I just say like, hey, if it's so many, it's this. If so many, it's that. Might look at it, but I don't have any problems with the maths. But I think in the moment I might not want to. Christopher says, yeah, the point is it's easier to spot a big party than a small one. I get it. I get it. You might even just want to say, like, hey, if party A is bigger than party B, then do this. If party B is bigger than party A, do that. Something just to kind of, I think that if you're in the moment and you're caught and you're trying to run the stuff, then you have to, like, if you think about it, if you're preparing the stuff in advance, you can run the size points and that's great. But you can also imagine where you might be running this in the spur of the moment and you got to throw the stuff out. Then you have to pull out the calculator and start doing size points. It might just be to look at and say, relatively speaking, or you could just say from 1 to whatever, you know what I mean? You could probably come up with some table that just kind of breaks it out so I can just easily just look and say, okay, yeah, this and this, and not have to do like 0.5 times 7 minus whatever. If you know what I'm saying, like the maths aren't bad, but if remember if someone's caught in the moment, they might not have a chance or the opportunity to run the calculations. But I definitely appreciate what you're going for there, and I like that you're having this kind of thing. I'm like, yeah, if you're a single character walking alone and there's an army on the other side of you, it's much easier for you to see the army than for the army to see you. But maybe there's a smoother way to get to that point. Michael Fraker brings up sifting sands. I don't know sifting sands. Now, Michael Fraker, you've given me something I got to look up. Risk of becoming lost. This only happens if the party is traveling in the wilderness without a distant landmark by which to navigate, such as a tall mountain in the distance. If they are traveling by road or by following a river or are moving towards a visible landmark, then you could disregard this result. Nothing happens. But if they're traveling in the wilderness without a landmark, then they now risk getting lost. First, without explaining why, roll a DC 14, adjust as you see fit depending on surroundings and circumstances, survival roll as the party navigator to see if they become lost. The navigator is simultaneously performing other roles, then make the roll at disadvantage. If the roll fails, the party ends up in a randomly determined adjacent hex of the same type, but don't tell them they are lost. Roll on the Hexcrawl action travel table for the new hex to see what happens there. The party will only find out that they are lost when they expect to come across something that is in a hex with which they have now involuntarily left. If they say, okay, we return to the clearing where we previously made camp, just tell them that they can't seem to find it. They will then have to figure out where they came from. There are no rules for that here, as it could be as simple or complex depending on the situation, and use the travel action to get back to where they were. If the roll failed and there are no adjacent hexes of the same type, then tell the party they briefly got lost and had them lose 1d2 hours finding their way back. If the roll succeeded, narrate how the navigator managed to resolve the situation. I think at first glance this is fine. I think in terms of figuring out where they came from, I think that could be another navigation, right? Isn't that the navigator? I would see definitely having the navigator make some kind of roll. I appreciate that you're sticking with like, hey, because like it makes sense. If you're lost, you're supposed to be in the forest, and you suddenly come out of the forest, you're going to know something's amiss if you were not intending to leave the forest. So that stuff is good. I might just say that instead of saying, they'll have to figure it out. I mean, I think they do have to figure it out, but I would also say that, hey, that's what kind of action is that figuring out part? It's probably also that navigation action. Oh, and Michael Frigger says it's undying sands, not shifting sands. Okay. Perkins says that they sometimes use a yes/no oracle on things. That works. Environmental hazards. On this one, you'll have to use your imagination to come up with something appropriate for the situation, but here are some suggestions. Trees falling across the road, preventing the party from easily getting their cart across, assuming they have a cart. Recent rain has caused a mudslide to block the passage through a ravine. Does the party risk bodily harm by trying to cross it, or take the long way around, losing valuable time in the process? Yep. Do we have I don't think on any of these you have something where we find a hazard. Would that be obstacle? Just want to make sure that you're using the same word vocabulary. So if we're using obstacle here in the events, then if that's what you mean, oh no, you have obstacle here. So what's the difference between a hazard and an obstacle? Oh, never mind. See, I totally missed this down here. Okay, so the obstacle is either risk of becoming lost or environmental hazard. Okay, that's my mistake. Somehow I skipped over that section there at the bottom. Um, and the thing is, and I don't know if you want to make note of it. It's probably just something for people running hex crawls. Sometimes if you want your obstacle hazard in this case, you want your hazard to be meaningful, like make sure that it fits, because some things you might throw out there as a GM thinking like, oh, here's their obstacle, but then it's like a single tree is falling across the road, and the party just goes, okay, we all get off the cart and move the tree, right? And it's over. And unless you have something else up your sleeve, then whatever you encounter your head just being like you were thinking, oh, they're gonna have to go off into this unknowns off the road and ooh and the party's just like we move the tree, we we cut it up. I use Eldritch Blast to disintegrate the tree, like whatever it is. So make sure if you're building out some of these environmental hazards, make sure that the hazards, if you want them to be hazardous, are actually hazardous. Because some things at certain points are going to become kind of trivial. They might be trivial from jump. Don't be surprised when the party's like, "Why are you even bothering us with this thing?" We're in the plains and there's a single tree across the road. Okay, so we just go around this one tree. You're like, what? Why do we need to stop and really think about that? Brian Smith obstacle says a single angry goose with a floppy hat. Now that you got to deal with. You got to be very careful around geese and floppy hats. Find location. If there are locations in this hex that the party hasn't discovered previously, then randomly determine which one of them they've discovered now. Consider assigning higher probabilities to the more prominent locations, for example, a village, than to more innocuous ones, such as a cave opening hidden behind some bushes. I don't know if innocuous is the word you want. Maybe more hidden. I'm not sure innocuous is the word you want, but that's neither here nor there. If there are no more locations to discover here, then tell the players that they now feel confident that they've discovered everything they could plausibly find in this hex by random chance, and that there is therefore little point in using the explore action anymore, which is specifically for finding previously undiscovered locations. Of course, there can still be hidden locations in the hex, which need more specific directions to find. The infamous angry floppy hat goose. Hey, Tony Nom. So this is not only a fifth edition kind of hex crawl rule set, Tony Nom, but it is by our own Christer Enfors. It is currently in alpha, beta, gamma, epsilon, still in progress, but we're workshopping through it, and it's excellent. So I think he said he's going to be dropping this at some point on drive through, whenever. So this will be coming to a digital marketplace near you at some point. It says, "You see a gazebo just off the road, players. I draw my sword." Yep, exactly. The one thing, so Chris, I was just gonna say about finding a location. Like, I think it might be nice. You might want to think what you can do with rewarding the party for fully exploring hexes. I could see giving them experience points, or you could put that as a note if you want to do that. If they want to clear out hexes for things like building strongholds or things like that, then there might be reasons why they might want to continue to explore and do that. And then maybe you could give them something like, hey, you've explored this location, this hex in full, so you get something for it. Whether you want to, you could just do that as a GM's note. It's just if you want to play with that kind of domain game, or you want to play and say, hey, look, there was something hidden in there you wouldn't normally found, but you've explored everything, so you found the little cave beneath the whatever. Some way of giving them an option. And I think it's good for the players to kind of think that if they do take the extra time to fully explore places, that they get something out of it, as opposed to like, well, you did it. Finding resources. The party comes across a resource. All party members make a survival roll. All members who rolls match or exceed the spot DC find resources, which means that the more members who succeed at the roll, the more resources are found. The ground is covered by snow, then you add 5 to the DC. If no one matches or exceeds the DC, then nothing is found. No rerolls. And then the kind of stuff you can get are edible roots, mushrooms, berries, or fruit. All good stuff. Are there other? I'm not sure. I don't think you're missing anything. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Roots, mushrooms, berries, fruit. Yeah, I mean, that works. Unless you want to include insects or things like that, like grubs. I mean, it's not technically like thing, but I mean, they're not technically like vegetables, but just all their things that you find. I'm just thinking about the stuff that they were doing in watching Alone. And Krister, if you haven't watched Alone or Naked and Afraid or one of those, you probably get some other ideas if you wanted to add other things. But I think insect proteins are definitely other things that you would forage for because you're just you're pulling up rocks or things and you find worms and other if folks want to eat that stuff. But when you're out in the wild, you'll eat what you can get. Krister saw found a typo. Yeah, I figured it's all that we yeah, I think yeah, you'll want to change that to yes, it's everyone who's undertaking the foraging action, not the whole party. And then under special, we can roll and see if we get random party member loses D4 rations, party meets a traveling trader, party finds a wilderness plot hook. Each of the results above table have explanations below. I'm gonna just kind of so the losing rations, I think we get that. Though you could have there is another role you could have, Krista, that some rule sets use, which is that kind of quartermaster, which you could fold that into a quartermaster action because what the quartermaster is doing is keeping track of all the supplies. So if you wanted to add another role for that, that could be one that folks could have if they wanted to. It gives them a chance to potentially mitigate that kind of loss if they wanted to. Traveling trader. Party finds a traveling trader. The trader is willing to buy anything they can conceivably carry at a quarter as opposed to the usual half of list price. They sell items listed in the table below. Alchemist fire, arrows, bullseye lantern, crossbow bolts, daggers, grappling hooks, healer's kits, potions of greater healing, potions of healing, rations. Boy, that traveler, man, my players would buy everything. but I'm the Scrooge DM that's like, nope, no potions of greater healing, nope, no potions of healing, and oh yeah, by the way, I don't even know if I even have healers kits in my game. That's cool. The other thing you can do is put this into some kind of table, and you could roll on the table to create the menu that your trader has. Let's see. So a potion of greater healing is 300 gold pieces. Yeah, that is expensive. But maybe you just came out of the dungeon, so you're all flush with cash. Another interesting thing, Krister, and it would be more complicated, but it could be fun. So by no means am I suggesting you should do this. Barter won't take gold. And you can think about the kind of trades. Okay, if this guy's going to be giving up a healer's kit that's worth 300 gold pieces, like what kind of things would you have to give up? Could be really interesting because then again it's that especially in fifth edition games where folks seem to be always flush with cash and GMs don't know what to do with it. Now, granted, this doesn't take care of that problem because they're going to be flush with cash anyway. However, if someone's like, "Well, I got this healer's kit. Don't give me gold. I'm out here in the middle of the woods. I need something I can sell. So you got to give me, I like that +1 sword you got there. So give me that and you can have this greater healing potion." Or it doesn't have to be, maybe that's too extreme, but some kind of bartering. You could have fun because it kind of puts the screws to them a little bit more than just gold. Perkins says that their players get very concerned or worried when they're given healing potions. You should be. I mean, I don't ever give them out, so my party doesn't think that. But I think if I was in a game and suddenly it's like, oh, here, I mean, it's like in a video game. We're like, oh, here's this extra shield. Like, wait a minute, I'm definitely going to need an extra shield. All right, so wilderness plot hooks. Here you will have to use your imagination. The party has come across something which could be the start of a plot line in the game. If you need inspiration, roll 3d6, one for each column. And so we have a goal, we have a focus, and we have obstacles. So the goal might be to destroy a mysterious beast, and the obstacle is an opposing party. All good. Let's have a look at an example. Roll for each of the columns. Goal, you get 3. Stop. Okay, we need to stop something. Focus. 3 again. It's a dungeon, so we need to stop a dungeon somehow. And 5, it's distance. I guess the dungeon's far away then. Now, we apply some imagination to these results and try to make a plot out of them. I think we can. I'm going to skip over this because I think we can kind of get the idea. What might stopping a dungeon be? It's because there's something in the dungeon which is continually crawling out to harass the local population. So you have to stop it by destroying the dungeon, blocking up the entrance, finding the thing that's in the bottom of the dungeon that's spawning endless creatures of dread out in the world and stopping it, whatever. We got it. We got it. Let's see. Time tracking sheet. I like it. I'm gonna skip over it, but I think it's a good thing. I think maybe Krister, when you get this into some kind of finalized form, have this on its own sheet, maybe as a not necessarily separate in terms of a PDF, but that way someone can print out that sheet and just have it. You could even make some kind of shorthand stuff near it, so you could kind of turn that into sort of a handout or something you could print out that gives you some shorthand stuff and the tracking. Designer notes. These rules do not cover everything. Yep, we got it. This system doesn't assume subhexes on designing random encounters. Not all random encounters have to be combat oriented. Also true. In 5th edition, Krister, I would. I don't know what the deal. I don't know if it's when you're. I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is under this the non-combat oriented. There are in the DMG, if you don't want to reprint yourself or come up with your own or reprint basically from older editions of D&D, there is. You have to look at the 5e D&D DMG, which I don't have in front of me, but they do have essentially a reaction rules. Like they do have reactions. They don't call it reactions; they call it something else. But you could reference that. I don't know. And what I was saying is, I don't know in terms of when you're creating products for 5th edition, if it's okay to reference, basically footnote in DMG page, whatever thing, or maybe you have to look at the SRD to see whether it's covered. I'm not sure where that stands. You might want to look at the SRD if it's in there or not. But there is something in the DMG for reaction rules if you want to put a reference to it or hint to it in that section. Use doing complication tables to make random encounters interesting. So what are they doing? They're fleeing, hiding, resting, eating, building, moving, scavenging, etc. And the complications, equipment, injury, infighting. They're stuck, they're starving, they're being hunted, and then no complication at all. You could probably come up with another. I feel like you could probably. I'm not sure what equipment is. The complication is they're ill equipped. Is that it? They're lacking equipment. I'm a little bit more on what you mean by equipment as the complication, because injury is kind of obvious, infighting is obvious, equipment, and like I'm wondering too if it's multiple things, you might, since you need, if you were going to fill this up, you could use 4 more. If they had multiple kind of like they're lacking equipment or they're overladen with their supplies or something, you could probably break this out into a couple. So if it's like ill-equipped or broken equipment, that could be one. Like undersupplied or something else, which would kind of overlap starving, but you could probably break them out and fill that in. Fill those out. All right, using reaction rolls. Oh, you got that already. Ooh, look at this. All right, hold on. If you don't have a reaction table you want to use, you can use this one. You might want to reference your reaction table here, and not all random encounters have to be combat oriented because reactions. So I would definitely reference. I didn't see it before, but reference. Connect these two together. Put C, such and such for reaction rolls. All right, so if you don't have a reaction table you want to use, you can use this one. Decide how likely you think it is the monsters are friendly on a scale of +7, extremely likely, to -7, extremely unlikely. This corresponds to which row to use on the table. Roll D20 and look at the result. The only thing, so I like this, but I would say that maybe I would have another die here. Maybe instead of using plus to minus, I would use some selection of dice. And maybe so maybe use like a 2D, like a 2D6, and just have from 3 to 12 or whatever, not 2D6, 2 to 12 kind of thing. And that way, because this is kind of arbitrary. Do I think they're plus? Like, I don't know what it means. Do I think they're +5 or they what? And then you could even use these same things kind of over here, so that you could say like, well, they're hostile. I mean, what are you gonna say? Well, they're unfriendly. Like you could have like, I think having the plain English for some of the rows would be helpful, so that I can look at it and say, well, these guys are mean. Mean. Okay, here's a line for mean. And then if I don't have it, I can roll some dice, 2d6, for example, and then get something. And that'll also give you a little bit of a. I know people have said that a 2d6 isn't a true um, bell curve, but whatever, it's close enough kind of thing. So you get mostly in the middle. And that way, just at a glance, because otherwise I'm going to have a hard time picking what those mean. Connect random encounters to sites. That's also a great idea. On designing locations, it's important to have interesting locations. Without them, your world will feel like a big arena for random encounters. Nothing else really to do. Connect sites to each other. This is also good advice. Create a pool of minor sites which aren't placed in the world yet. Also good advice. Suitable adventures for hex crawls. In general, their advice is not to run a campaign simply as a hex crawl. By that I mean hex crawl should not be all your campaign is. Instead, run a normal campaign, whatever that means to you, where travel and exploration is handled with these rules. Very good advice. Lord of the Rings would have been an awesome hex crawl. I agree. Lord of the Rings is actually really great in terms of it being both a hex crawl and a narrative adventure. There's elements of, obviously, there's an overarching narrative, and there's also tons of hex crawl. So it's a really good example. Braun says they're late to the party. What's the consensus with this? Thumbs up or thumbs down? So, Broughton, this is actually a work in progress by our very own Christer Enfors. I mean, I don't want to speak out of turn. I'm obviously biased, but it's definitely a thumbs up. Now it's still in some kind of alpha beta phase. This is not final layout. This is not final everything, and we're kind of workshopping it. So I presume that before this goes up onto wherever it goes, I think Christer said he's going to throw it up on drive-through at some stage. This is not final layout. There's no art. There's no maps, things like that. But I feel like, and folks, you guys can let me know in the chat what you guys think, having seen it. But I would say thumbs up for me. Following in someone's footsteps, let's say the party has to catch up to someone who's traveling across the lands who has about a week's head start. The person could have left clues behind about where they're going next that the party can find, or they can come across people which that person has met who can send them in the right direction. Oh, Christer, so this is making me think, following in someone's footsteps, throw this in for the trader. That's another thing the trader can trade, information. So I would even add that to wherever you're, whoops. Well, where was it? Throw in something here about trading information and what info they might have about stuff. Because that's another thing that could be very, very, very valuable, and it just fits right in. Yeah, you're following somebody, you run across a trader, and it couldn't even have to be about someone following. They could know stuff about one of these hidden areas in the hex. There could be all kinds of information. You could even give different DCs or randomness for what they can, what they might have. And yeah, there you go. And they can also sell treasure maps. Absolutely. In general, hex crawls are great for sandboxes. That's true. Resources. Oh, look at that. And I did not give this a thumbs up because I am mentioned in here, but I appreciate the shout out, Christer, the Alexandrian, and then contact. You sure you want to throw your contact information out there, Christer? You are a braver man than I. And that, ladies and germs, is the D12 Hexcrawl system for D&D 5th edition preview number 1. Fresh. Look at this. Dated December 8th today. Cannot get any fresher than that. Christer, I hope we were able to give you some feedback that will be helpful to the final product. Do you have, Christer, do you have any are you trying to get this ready for any particular launch date? Do you have some sense of when you want to get this up, or is it just it's going to be up when it's up? Let me know if we know. But yeah, this is really cool. Thanks for sharing it. See, Perkins says it looks solid already. It absolutely does. Absolutely does. I think and like I said, I think from my standpoint, one of the things, and again, I'm not a I don't do tons of 5th edition. I'm not running 5th edition right now. I think if it might be helpful, maybe an appendix to give some like standby, like I said, for like lookouts and like those things, perception things that NPCs might be doing. Just give some values so that I can easily look and just grab a DC, or not grab a DC, but grab a modifier if I need to, without basically, so I don't have to scramble through monster manuals. If I run across, oh, I got wolves, I could just find something like, oh, did the wolves see the party? Oh, like animals give them perception 10 and roll like whatever. It just like for me, I wouldn't. There are certain points where I wouldn't care if like, well, wolves really have perception plus 14 instead of perception plus 10. It's like I don't care. I'm just making a rough roll, just to help kind of give them things where they don't have to, because especially with fifth edition, there are tons of books. I'm not, we don't want to do every creature, but just some kind of shorthands might be helpful. Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe different folks run their games obviously differently, but the amount of times that I can use one resource and not necessarily have to dip out into 8 other books if I just need some shorthand, for me anyway, it's helpful. Cool. Well, thanks a bunch, Krister. Now, and the funny thing, Krister, is people are looking at this and they're and I probably did a poor job in my in the titling of the stream, but they're expecting to be able to find this. It's certainly there's enough content there, good enough content. I think get it into layout, add some stuff, you know, whatever, and you throw some art in there if you want to, and then go from there. Tony Nam wants to know where we can find you on social media. So it's in the back here, but he's on Mastodon at Enfors, or kind of like at Enfors on ttrpg-hangout.com. And then he's also Enfors, Enfors on Twitter, which is deprecated. It's not that deprecated because Krister's still answering DMs on. I'm just going to write this. I'll drop this in the chat. Show that on screen. And then the Mastodon is ttrpg-hangout.com if you're on Mastodon. Thanks again to Krister for hanging out deep into the night in Sweden to do this. This was a lot of fun, folks. If you're here in the community and you have something that you want us to take a look at for one reason or another, happy to do it. Just hit me up. And I was thinking, originally I was going to do the Blade Runner unboxing today, but then I thought, I don't know. And then Krister sent that thing and I said, I'll do Krister's thing today. So you never know. You might send it to me and it might take me months to get to it. You might send it to me and I might do it that very same day. So just got to roll with the odds, but happy to take a look at it, folks. Everybody have a great day, night, whenever you end up watching or listening to this. If you want to give a thumbs up on your way out, that would be awesome. If you found yourself in here and you're not subscribed and you feel like subscribing, that would also be awesome. Otherwise, game on, and I will talk to you later. Bye now.